Nations don't always collapse loudly. Sometimes they simply change the meaning of their promises. Welcome to WWII, where history isn't just remembered, it's used to understand how money, power, and systems quietly break, how Britain quietly defaulted. After World War II, when people hear the word default, they imagine chaos, currency crashes, empty banks, foreign creditors knocking at the door, governments begging for bailouts. But applied financial history tells a different story. The most important defaults in modern history were not loud. They were polite, legal, technically correct. And Britain after World War II is one of the cleanest examples ever recorded. The illusion of victory in 1945. Britain emerged from World War II as a victor. The Union Jack still flew over an empire. London was still a global financial center. British institutions still projected confidence. But beneath the surface, Britain was financially exhausted. The war had not merely drained resources, it had liquidated the future. Between 1939 and 1945, Britain funded survival by selling nearly everything that could be sold. Gold reserves were spent, foreign investments were liquidated, overseas assets were transferred to allies. The empire itself was leveraged to pay for ammunition, food, and fuel. Britain did not finance the war. It consumed its balance sheet. By the end of the war, Britain faced an uncomfortable truth. It had won militarily, but lost financially, and the cost of victory was not yet fully visible. The debt nobody wanted to talk about. After the war, Britain owed enormous sums to the United States. Not symbolic debt, not manageable debt, existential debt. In 1945, Britain negotiated a massive loan from the US, roughly $375 billion plus additional credit from Canada. Adjusted for today, this represented hundreds of billions of dollars. But the money itself was not the real problem. The conditions were. One condition in particular would quietly destroy Britain's financial position. Britain was required to make the pound sterling freely convertible into US dollars. On paper, this sounded reasonable. In reality, it was catastrophic. Why convertibility? Was a trap convertibility meant that anyone holding British pounds could exchange them for dollars on demand. But Britain did not have dollars. It had debt. The pound was not strong, it was protected. And once protection was removed, reality moved fast. In 1947, when convertibility began, confidence collapsed almost immediately. Foreign holders rushed to exchange pounds for dollars. Britain's limited dollar reserves evaporated in weeks. The financial system did not break, but it exposed something far worse. Britain could not honor its commitments as promised. The moment Britain chose silence over truth. At this point, Britain faced a choice. It could admit insolvency. It could openly default. It could renegotiate publicly. That would have been honest. It would also have been politically devastating. So Britain chose a different path. It suspended convertibility. It imposed capital controls. It restructured obligations without using the word default. Legally, Britain remained solvent. Economically, it had broken a promise. This is where applied financial history draws a sharp distinction. Default is not a declaration. Default is a failure to deliver value as promised. Britain delivered pounds, but those pounds no longer meant what they once did. The quiet default. Begins Britain did not erase its debt. It changed how repayment worked. And it did so using three powerful tools. Each tool was legal, each tool was subtle. Together, they created one of the most effective quiet defaults in modern history. Tool number 1, financial repression. The British government kept interest rates artificially low for decades. This was not accidental. Low rates meant savers earned less than inflation. Government borrowing became cheap. Debt shrank in real terms. The government did not take money directly. It let inflation do the work. Citizens who saved responsibly paid the bill. Tool number 2, inflation as strategy. Britain did not aggressively fight inflation after the war. Instead, inflation was tolerated, even welcomed. Prices rose, wages lagged, savings lost purchasing power. But government debt, measured in nominal pounds, became easier to manage. This was not chaos, it was policy. Tool number 3, capital controls. For decades, British citizens were restricted from moving money abroad. Foreign investments required permission. Gold ownership was controlled. Currency transfers were limited. These controls served one purpose: prevent capital from escaping. When a system is fragile, freedom becomes a threat. Who paid the price? The quiet default did not hurt everyone equally. The greatest losers were not foreign creditors. They were British citizens. Middle-class savers. Retirees holding government bonds. Workers whose wages lagged inflation. These people did everything right. They trusted institutions. They saved responsibly. They believed in long-term stability, and they paid for it quietly. The greatest beneficiary was the British state. Debt burdens declined in real terms. Spending power was preserved. Political stability was maintained. From the government's perspective, the strategy worked. The empire fades. Without a crisis, Britain's imperial decline is often described as political or moral. In reality, it was financial. Maintaining an empire is expensive. Military presence, administrative control, economic subsidies. Britain could no longer afford it. So withdrawal began. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. India, Africa, the Middle East. Each exit reduced financial strain, and each confirmed Britain's new reality: stability. Without dominance, by the 1950s and 1960s, Britain appeared stable. There was no hyperinflation, no social collapse, no dramatic default headline. But something irreversible had happened. Britain was no longer a global financial power. The pound was no longer the world's anchor. London was no longer the unquestioned center of finance. The dollar had replaced it. This is the paradox of quiet default. It preserves order, but it destroys position. Britain survived, but it never recovered its former dominance. Why history often gets this wrong, ask most people today if Britain ever defaulted. They will say no, because no announcement was made, no crisis erupted, no legal declaration occurred. But applied financial history looks beyond labels. It asks a simpler question. Did creditors receive what they were promised in real terms? The answer is no. Britain repaid its debts, but it repaid them in devalued currency, under restricted conditions, over extended timelines. That is a default in everything but name. Why this matters? Today, Britain's experience is not unique. It is a blueprint. Modern systems use the same playbook. Low interest rates, persistent inflation, debt rollovers, capital restrictions, narrative management. The difference is speed. What took Britain decades can now happen in years. The most dangerous idea in finance is the belief that defaults must look dramatic. They do not. The most effective defaults are the ones nobody calls a default. The real lesson of Britain's quiet failure: Britain did not fail because it was reckless. It failed because it prioritized stability over truth. Admitting insolvency would have forced reform. Reform would have caused pain, so pain was delayed instead, and delayed pain always compounds. Applied financial history teaches us something crucial here. Governments rarely default on paper. They default through policy, and they almost always default against their own citizens first. Why quiet defaults are so dangerous? Loud defaults provoke resistance. Quiet defaults normalize loss. People adapt. Expectations adjust. Standards decline slowly. There is no moment to revolt. By the time people realize what happened, the system has already moved on. The final pattern Britain's post-war story is not tragic. It is instructive. It shows how advanced systems protect stability at the cost of honesty. And it shows why history rarely warns us loudly. Because the most important changes happen without noise. Closing thought. When a government says, everything is under control, history asks one question: at whose expense? If you want to understand money and power beyond headlines, subscribe to WWII.